Okay, so let's introduce everyone. Actually, you can stand up. Let's see. Explain who you are and give a brief background of the company you're representing and say your name, I guess.
Should I really stand up?
Just for this part, you can sit down.
Okay. I'm Matthew Donatelli. I work for Graphite Lab. I'm here kind of standing in for Matt Rathel, who's the studio head, who knows a lot more of the businessy stuff than I do. But I'm a game designer, and I do a large part of project management and stuff too. So I'm going to be talking about how to make games full-time, adopting kind of a work-for-hire model, contract work, and also about our recent successful Kickstarter for Hive Jump.
My name is Michael Orlando, and I know a few of you. I'm the president of Lumate, which used to be IDC Projects. Was started about 6 years ago. We've made a number of video games, all mobile focused, lots of them advertising focused, or at least monetized through advertising. My background is I started the company, learned a lot about game development, and then we actually moved more into the advertising side. So we're one of the companies that hopefully would help all of you make money as publishers as you put out your game when you need to serve ads inside of it, if you want to go that way. It's kind of evil.
Don't say that out loud!
Well, it's a big portion of being able to be a publisher is to understand both sides of it. So some of you might monetize it, but some of you also might acquire a lot of users through advertising. And so that's one of the things that we do is we help publishers acquire users through advertising in an effective way, so it's not a bunch of waste of your money, which a lot of people in the industry right now, that's kind of how it goes. You can spend a lot of money and not know what your return is. We help try to fix that from a very back office type of operation. I personally spend a lot of my time going out and looking at fundraising. Since we switched from a kind of bootstrapped model to a venture-funded model, I've raised about $850,000 with our company so far, and have done so with both individuals in St. Louis, so I have a unique perspective in the venture industry in terms of like how to find investors in St. Louis, and also from debt financing. So if you're actually going to go to a bank, we've raised $350,000 from a bank, and did that under an SBA program, and so I have experience with what that looked like and how it went. So that's the angle that I add today.
My name is Sam Coster. I'm with Butterscotch Shenanigans, which is a company of myself, my brother Seth, who does programming, and then our other brother who recently joined a few weeks ago. We are entirely bootstrapped. We saved up a bunch of money and then quit our jobs, and then didn't become homeless. So we're successful. And we've gone through a lot of growth as far as the way that we conceptualize making money. We make games in the mobile market, and we went from paid to free to play, and all the interesting quirks that has mindset-wise. So our biggest thing is that you as a developer, if you're making games, and if you want to be paid for your games, you have to come into it with that mindset. We can talk a lot about that later on.
I'm Ben Triola. I'm part of Happy Badger Studio. Other parts of Happy Badger Studio are here in the front row. Carol, Dana, recently TJ. We have another part-timer that are actually full-timer now, Joey, that helps us with games. But games is a second business for us. Our first business is Rampant Interactive. We make websites, apps, and games for clients, primarily websites. So my perspective that I'm bringing is how to sort of balance the work that makes money with the work that is fun, and how hopefully we'll make the fun work eventually be the money work too.
I am George Norman Lippert. I am pretty much the totality of Speedbump Studios. I make mostly 3D narrative-based games for the mobile market. Looking to kind of schlep over to do some PC stuff. And I'll be mostly stealing these guys' ideas and presenting them as my own.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool. So that's the people. I'm going to ask some questions, but you shouldn't feel like this is all mine. This is your event. So if you think that don't worry about me. If there's something you want to know, just be a jerk until I tell everyone, okay, stop being jerks, and like raise your hand or just interrupt them. No, don't interrupt them. Just raise your hand and throw your question out there. Okay, cool. So nobody really got into this, and if you did, I apologize. But briefly explain how you fund your game development, and any of you can jump in.
Sure. I'll just start, I guess. We do a lot of work for hire or contract work. So basically what that looks like is that we've got to find someone who needs a game that needs to be made. So we do a lot of kind of biz dev and networking to find contacts for that. And then we pitch game design ideas. And we'll keep pitching until we land something. The contracts can be anywhere between $20,000 to make a very small project to even $2 million on a really large project. And so we kind of pitch, we get them eventually, and then we make them. Yes.
What kinds of projects? Can you talk about like the actual names of the projects and the companies that you've worked for?
Sure. I mean, I can talk a little bit about kind of our partner relationship right now with Playdate Digital. They're like a publisher in New York that focuses on preschool, like children's apps for iPhone and Android. So we're making a lot of storybooks right now with them, and each project is more on the smaller side of those budgets. The way it works is kind of on our first big project with a new partner, whether it be Playdate or someone else, we usually end up bleeding a little bit on that project and the budget is a bit bigger, and then we try to economize by reusing a lot of the frameworks that we develop over and over. And also we try to negotiate royalties whenever we can, because that really helps. It's a win-win for developers and publishers, because developers, you want to make a really good game that's going to sell well, because you're going to see royalties back from that after you recoup the cost of production. So we actually have recouped every single project that we've done with Playdate now and are making royalties on the sale of every app, which is great for us. Money coming in with no work. No continued work, really. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So that's kind of our cycle. We're also doing a passion project, which we recently kickstarted, called Hive Jump. Actually, our model is very good for Kickstarter because we're used to pitching so much, but now instead of pitching to a publisher or a small relationship like that, you're pitching to thousands of people, which is a lot harder, and we learned a lot of lessons in that. So, yeah.
So bootstrapped.
Yeah. The question I think was
how do you fund your game?
How do you fund game development?
So we put some money in the bank. So we had 6 months of runway, so that we could pay the bills for 6 months. And by pay the bills, I mean your rent, some of your AC, and some food, and
the ramen noodle plan.
Yeah, basically ramen noodle plan, and. That was how we first funded it. We made our first game was a pay up front game called Tau Fight 2, Monocle of Destiny. Got a PR guy for it, and we call it our critically acclaimed financial failure. Did great, got in Kotaku, got in a bunch of Touch Arcade, all the cool guys looked at it, said it was fun. It's kind of like a Zelda style shooting game. And didn't do so hot as far as the finances go, because pay up front games are extremely difficult, at least in our experience, to actually sell on the mobile marketplace nowadays with all the free comparisons. So for the next one, that took us 10 weeks to make. So we made another one in 10 weeks called Quadrupus Rampage, and then did not hire a PR guy because we don't have a lot of money and because we had a lot of contacts now. So we pilfered the contacts from that first exchange, and then I was the PR guy for the last 4 weeks of development of a 10-week project. And we basically, through the same process of essentially pitching over and over and over again and harassing people, got Quadrupus all over the place. Touch Arcade, basically the same sort of places we had before. And through that, we are doing very well on Google Play. iTunes we still have yet to crack, but we have over 2 million players, and we make enough money to be alive. So that's essentially where we're at now, and our aim with the next game that we're launching, which is a project that's a year in the making as opposed to 10 weeks, which is called Crashlands, is a free-to-play crafting survival adventure RPG. I'll throw more genres in there if you like.
Sci-fi.
It's got some monster battling, some training, that sort of thing, and it is narrative driven as well. So that one is hopefully wrapping up in a couple months here, but the funding for that one has been through the passive income, as Matt had mentioned, of Quadrupus Rampage, because we made that game almost more than a year ago, last June, and we get money every day from the App Store for that, and that keeps the lights on and everything else.
So we, as I mentioned, we fund our games with client work. So we have a lot of the same kind of like pitching, that kind of thing. Only the client work that we do is primarily not games. It's usually websites or interactive apps and that kind of thing. And so we try to make enough money doing the client work that can pay for us to live, and then a little bit more. So that means that we have some time of our week we can spend working on games and not have to worry about client work. The plus side of that is our games are completely our games. We don't have to answer to anybody. We don't even have to try to make money with them if we don't want to, although we do want to. The downside is that when the client work gets heavy, then that's where our focus has to be. The client has to come first, because if that dries up, then we lose our funding for our games.
My perspective on this is that funding comes from one of two things. Now, this is based on the fact that before I was a video game designer, I was a writer, and I was slightly less successful as a writer than I was as a video game designer. But I learned my approach there. There are two ways you can fund a project, whether it's a book or whether it's a game. You can fund it with money, or you can fund it with sheer effort. If you're fortunate enough to be able to do it on your own, which is what I was able to do, I followed your model, Ben. I would work on freelance stuff. I would work on whatever jobs I could get. And then in my spare time, I would come home and just like my books, I'd either write or I'd work on my game. And the beauty of that is I can fool myself into thinking I've made no monetary investment. I don't need to make any money back. That's forgetting that my time is actually worth money too. Yeah. But it works. It works for a while. There's a mental exercise there in thinking I'm really not risking anything other than my time and my investment. So that is definitely one way to approach funding your game. As much as you can find people to help you out or do it yourself, and there's always people who are willing. You know, we're all artists, really, when it comes down to it. We're making games, or to some extent we're artists. And artists will make art for the sheer fun of making art. So if you can keep that mentality, eventually you'll probably get to the point, where you make at least a little money. And I've been fortunate enough to make a little money on my games, as well as my books. So that's how I approach it. Time is funding as well.
I'd give since there is such a slant towards, well, telling others what you're going to do, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But I will speak about us trying to do that and how that didn't work and how that wasn't how we funded our games. Because our process was to make as many games as we possibly could, very, very early on before we got into the advertising stuff. And we went out and we tried to raise money. So we tried to get other external investors, and investors not in the sense of a Kickstarter where that person wants to see the game, more so in the sense that an investor is investing in this as if they were to invest in the stock market or in a house. And we said, look, we have games and they've made money. And at that point we had made, I don't know, a few $100,000 with some of our properties overall as a portfolio. And they said, yeah, when are you going to see some traction? And we said, the money's in the bank. And they're like, yeah, so when you get some traction and when you have more users, then we'll talk about funding you. And that was when I realized that that wasn't a viable option to do that. And that really it comes back to having someone in your space that understands. So the Kickstarter route is a great example. If you have a lot of people that actually understand why your game will be fun, they will connect with that. But if you try to go to someone and say, look, this is a viable entity to invest in, when they're thinking stocks and bonds and mutual funds, there is a large gap that you will have to bridge. So that person either needs to understand what you're doing or have a good relationship with you and understand that you or your team, or you and your team, can really execute this and bring in the money from it, because all that they're going to look at is the risk, and they're not necessarily going to be concerned with how cool the idea is, which is unfortunate, because many of the ideas are very cool.
Sure.
Questions?
Jump in.
So I just graduated from Webster, coming a little bit from international business and stuff like that. So, and I've been reading up about game dev, with Kickstarter being more as like a presentation tool than an actual funding, because it takes so much money to make games. Would that be more, would that be a source to lower risk if you were to pitch it to one of those investor type people? Let's say, hey, we have $100,000 in funding through Kickstarter before the game's either released or people are buying this greenlighted game on Steam. Wouldn't that be wouldn't that help to push them to get funding from them?
Yes,
Okay.
definitely. It's a form of third-party endorsement, right? If I tell you, hey, I've had 25 years picking stocks and I've made a bunch of money on it, and I have a stock I think you should buy. It's that I am some kind of expert. So if the community is the expert in Kickstarter and they've backed it with their dollars, when you go to someone and say, look, you don't even need to know what the game is, but I have $100,000 in backing. Are you interested? They will probably look more than if you have nothing.
And how would you make that work with like an ad-heavy game? Like when you mentioned introduce yourself, you said ads are like the primary focus of your games. Because I mean, in Kickstarters and stuff, that would be called out on pretty quickly.
Oh yeah.
So-
That's
Yes.
free-to-play model is not going to fly on Kickstarter. I'd be okay with just saying.
Also, you could,
I would.
you could of course,
I'd go there.
It's not going to.
you could of course go to an investor or publisher and say, hey, we got X amount on Kickstarter, match it. But of course, they're going to want royalties of your game as well, of the sales of your game. So you're going to be giving up some of that independence that a lot of game devs go to Kickstarter because they don't want to be beholden to a publisher. I mean, I think to a certain extent, if Hive Jump hadn't have succeeded on Kickstarter, we might have considered the publisher route, but now we don't. We're not going to be forced into it, which is nice. So.
I'm really curious, just to get some audience participation. How many people have backed a Kickstarter project ever? Okay. Keep your hands up. How many of you have royalties from that project that you backed? That is the difference between Kickstarter and investing.
If you did, you're violating the terms of Kickstarter.
Yes.
Unless you back your own game.
Nobody does that. What are you talking
who does
about?
that? Come on.
Not me, certainly.
I saw the list of all the backers.
So,
so far.
So this is kind of a follow-up a little bit. So before you start a game, how much effort do you go into making sure that that game will meet your standards commercially? I guess, how much pre-work do you do before beginning a game? Anyone can jump in.
So we're a little curious in that we build games really fast. So we don't really. We always have the goal of making roughly $1 bajillion. But it takes us less than 10 weeks to make what you call a game that would get in the top charts for most of these things. So the biggest hurdle for us is not actually the making of the game. There's certain making games, once you essentially have some of the concepts down, the game making itself is not actually the difficult part anymore. The selling of the game is actually the difficult part. And so market viability, when you're talking about more than 97 games coming out every single day, comes down to a lot more than just the game itself. So our big thing is after our initial failures and everything else, is you have to build for the platform that you're going to be on. So in that case, you need to know what a user does when they pick up whatever the device is that you're building a game for. So if you're talking about a phone, you're looking at user sessions that are less than 2.5 minutes on average, which means that your game needs to be fun in 2.5 minutes or less all the time. As well as, if you want to actually collect people who pay you money, it needs to be fun for 45 minutes or for 6 hours or whatever else. So what that means is you have to have a very strong concept of essentially when someone picks up the device and they start messing around on it, how much time do you have? It's not like a PC in our case, where you often have 25 to 45 minutes of someone's time before they're going to give up and move on to something else in their Steam library. Or maybe not, maybe just buy your game and not even play it. Yeah. So we don't get that because they're free. So so there's a lot to consider in that regard. And I think for us the biggest thing is, can we make the game really, really fun? If the answer is yes, then we say, can we monetize off of that fun? And that really comes down to, can you get a huge user base for ads? And can you provide things that people actually deem of value and that you feel okay selling as a developer, that someone might deem valuable to buy with an in-app purchase of some sort? Be that a whole new mode for the game, or new skins, new weapons, anything like that. So those are really the questions to ask. And so it depends on the game. You can monetize any game in any way, and you can see how it goes really, really poorly when they don't match up appropriately. Everybody's got their examples of that. But Candy Crush, as far as matching the mode of payment to the type of game, is actually a really beautiful illustration of how the whole thing can work. You buy power-ups, and that's it. And if you don't buy power-ups, they just show you tons of ads. So what that means is that they're okay saying, we made this, so since you're enjoying it, you have to pay us, or that guy has to pay us, you know. And really, that's an interesting thing that I think a lot of indie devs have a really hard time with, is saying, I deserve to be paid for my work. And we had a really hard time with this. We did not put ads in our games to start with. We were under the Doom impression of ads. And then we made a game in 6 hours and launched it. And we put ads in it, and it paid the rent and then some after getting about 50,000 users on Google Play. So we reverse applied the metrics that we had for the ad interaction and realized that we had left about half of the entire revenue of Quadrupus Rampage on the table by not putting in ads. And we thought, you know, why is it okay for people to not pay us for something? And we thought, it's not okay for people to not pay us. So now we're okay with putting ads in things. And the weird thing is that it took a year. It took a year and a half. Right?
I remember that time, and we were kind of looking at you like,
yeah.
What's up with these guys?
Putting ads in your game, what, you want to get paid?
No, we were surprised that you weren't putting ads.
I know. Yeah, you guys do it all the time. So you guys are
We're all added out.
Yeah, good.
Hold on. You saying you were able to keep your lights on with 50,000 downloads and ad revenue only?
Yes.
I need to talk to you about what your ad network is.
Sure.
Because
What's your ad network?
I guarantee you.
That's a good question.
That's the business guy. I
Something
don't
is
know.
wrong. Without even knowing, I guarantee you it's a lot less about their ad network and a lot more about the staying power of their games.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, like, up to this point, we haven't put a lot of thought into the commercial viability of a game before we build it. And I'm kind of okay with that because we just made stuff that we wanted to make, and that was cool. But the more that we're seeing, it really, if you're going to do free-to-play or ads, it really has to do with how big that user base is and how often the user base comes back to play your game again. And so, like Sam said, it has to be fun. It has to get them wanting to play again after those 2-minute sessions. Because if they only play once, that's a wasted download. So that's something that we're going to be working on with our next releases, is creating more loops and creating more reason to bring the player back into the game. Because that's what's going to make your 50,000 users bring in that much money. It has nothing to do with what ad network they have.
It also depends on how much you pay for rent. So, yeah. Our bottom line has not budged since we launched. We started as a studio. If anything, it's gone down with being smarter about how you use the AC and stuff like that. So that's really important. I think people don't quite understand that part of the whole metric as well. You have to cover your expenses. So minimize your expenses and maximize the other side, and you have a winning proposition. But a lot of people just ignore one or the other entirely.
So I have a quick audience participation question again, because I don't get to do this normally. Okay, how many people have a game that they've published that's out and live or something like that? I mean, we may not have enough statistics. Okay, how many of you, keep your hands up, nope, keep your hands up. How many of you have some sort of analytics system to monitor how your games are performing and the user interactions inside? Oh, okay. Yeah, you need to work on that. Some of you need to work on that. Okay, cool. So what that comes back to, you can put your hands down, it's cool. The idea of monitoring what you have already and knowing that when you make a change to it, how does that affect the user base? So one of the things that we modify almost solely is the way that we do our advertising in our game, the ads that we show and the networks that we use, et cetera, so on. We monitor very closely to see if we serve certain types of ads, will that cause user attrition? Will people leave because they see certain types of ads or something like that? And you want to change that slowly. Now you can apply that mechanic to anything, whether it be the commercial part or as actual gameplay. With the stuff that we have that's successful in the store right now, that's what the method that we take. So it's not really we did this beforehand. It was we have this now and we want to make sure that we don't break it. let's be careful with what we change and monitor. And we do spend a lot of our time making sure that what we're going to change is not going to break what we already have.
Sweet. Okay.
I was going to take a crack at answering the initial question, if that's cool.
No, I really.
But how much work goes into, what was it, like?
I didn't even write. I wrote it down.
Whatever. Point is, for us, how much planning and work goes into that? For us, on a contract basis, it's entirely like a lot of work and planning because we don't get paid until we've got basically a winning pitch, right? So when we work with our partners, we eat the costs of making the design wireframes and stuff like that, which isn't always ideal, but we try to make up for it on the other side, right? So once a pitch actually lands on the production side, negotiating royalties, stuff like that, we try to recoup the design costs. But a lot of the time, the design we do is for free until we land something. And we'll probably land 1 out of every 10 pitches or something like that. Actually, that number's gone up a lot over the years. But that was kind of it for starters. So,
George?
I'm gonna ask a Michael kind of question. How many of you want to make games in order to make a lot of money? Don't be shy. How many of you want to make games because you love making games? That's the category I fall in. Now, because of that, I'm a terrible businessman. I need to consult with you guys. But what I've learned, now my games, like I said, they're 3D games and they're narrative based. They tend to be the kind of game that demands more than 2.5 minutes. So, bad business idea. But I just want to make games. This is part of why I want to get into making PC games. People are willing to sit down more, in front of their computer a little longer. But there is a small market for people who are willing to sit on the couch for a couple hours and play on their phone, a small market. But what I learned as somebody who I want to make money, but primarily I just love making games. If you happen to fall into that category, here's what I figured out. My first game was a game that just represented exactly the kind of game I want to play. And it did really well for a first game. It was featured on the App Store, it got loads of press, and I thought, wow, this is fantastic. My next game, I'm going to design something that people will want to play. So I made more of it wasn't a first-person shooter, but it was much more geared towards a hardcore gamer audience. There was more adventure, less storyline. It was called Robot Gladiator. It was more sci-fi slugfest sort of thing, in the vein of what's the big epic, the swipe fighter game that everybody's playing?
Infinity Blade.
Infinity Blade. It was more along the line of Infinity Blade, and I wouldn't say it tanked, but it didn't do very well. And then my second game, I thought, okay, I'm not hitting the right audience. That was aiming at these really hardcore gamers, and they're hard to please. They're impossible to please. So I'm going to go for more of a casual gamer. Not necessarily something I love, but more of a casual gamer. So I made a bowling game. Everybody loves bowling games. It did worse than Robot Gladiator. Because I don't know if this is part of it, but I really wasn't super passionate about it. I made a game that defied why I was making games. I was trying to design it to make money. And then with my fourth game, I went back to just making exactly the game that I want to make. And I got a publisher based on that game, and it's done better than anything I've made so far. It's got lots of great press. It's got some crappy press too, but mostly it's got some really great press. So if you happen to fall into the category of somebody who primarily just loves making games, if you also want to make money, my best advice is keep making games that you are really passionate about. Obviously, some thought has to go into, everything these guys have said, and I need to take notes because I need to do more what they've said.
Don't worry, it'll get posted on YouTube.
Okay. But there is something to be said, depending on the kind of game you're making, depending on the kind of game you're making, there's something to be said for making a game that you just love. Now, I think you guys also make games that you love.
Yes. They're not mutually exclusive.
No, they're not mutually exclusive, exactly.
Yeah. So I think a big part for us is also coming to terms with timing. When was your first one released? When the App Store's first thing?
Yeah, it was right after Infinity Blade came out, so whenever that was.
Yeah, so there's a lot of, you hear a lot of, there's this narrative that goes around in the game dev culture and game dev community about the indie dev who just posted something and then suddenly went wild and he made a ton of money, and then he went and talked at GDC. And you see a lot of these talks actually at GDC. It's these guys who are like, yeah, I put it up at like 2 in the morning, and then I woke up the next day and had $1 million in the bank. And the weird thing is, you can't actually learn anything from that guy, because the reality is, as the 1 in 10 pitches thing suggests, it takes a hell of a lot of work for the average person, most people, to actually just get to a point where you're sustaining yourself off of the games, and then to get to a point where you actually make enough money to, you know, grow as a studio or whatever else. And that's been our biggest thing. Is we used to read Kama Sutra, the r/game dev subreddit, all these things, and for the most part, they repeat this narrative. Like, if you just build a good game, kick it out there, it'll be great.
If you build it, they will come.
Yeah, if you build it, they will. It's not true.
It's
just not true. There's more than, you know, there's way more than 100 games coming out every single day. They don't know. They just don't know about your game. And even if they did, they still might not come because it costs $1. So, in our case, basically what it came down to was our first game was this pay up front title, and it was kind of inspired by a game that I really liked, which is Binding of Isaac. And of course it flopped magnificently. And that was the sort of big slap in the face we needed, where it was essentially like, you know, you are making it for yourself, and you need to know who your end user is, for sure. You have to design with a person in mind who's going to play your game, and you need to be selling to that person, not trying to sell to everybody. But at the end of the day, you know, you have to figure out the way in which to deliver that particular good in the marketplace as it exists. And if you're entering into the iPhone market around the time where it was just starting, there were a lot of devs who made good games and did just put them up there at that time, because they were actually discoverable at that time. Yeah. Discoverability was not a problem, which it is now. So there's a lot of successes and successes that have a hard time bearing a repeat then afterward, because the rules of the game change, but it happens so fast in the mobile market that it doesn't seem like it should in like a 6-month window. But just as a sort of side note, you know, when I spent the time marketing, like I said, I spent 30% of my time, 40% of my time in the making of a game, marketing and doing beta testing and alpha testing. And you know, there are days where I would write upwards of 50 emails that were personally crafted to anybody and everybody who I thought might listen, based on this big, just random pull of sites that I got off the internet, because I don't actually play mobile games, right? So you have to just do the work at the end of the day, and that's what we espouse to, is, you know, you can do it. I'm always very impressed by if you manage to do it on like nights and weekends, right? Because it is just a hell of a lot of work. And I think if you're of the impression that you can just, if you want to make money making games, if you want people to pay you to be alive, essentially, which is what our goal is, then you have to have an eye toward that, and you have to be willing to put in the work to sell the crap out of your game at the end of the day. And if you're not doing it, then you can't expect anybody to buy it, period.
So a great game is necessary, but it's absolutely not the only thing.
A great game is the bare minimum.
Yeah.
Or even insufficient.
With no download.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Submitting something to Kickstarter is a lot like submitting it to the actual marketplace.
Yeah.
Because we thought, okay, we've got a workable prototype, we've got a page that's really nicely laid out. We're good to go. We're good to go, and it's completely wrong. They won't even discover you on Kickstarter anymore. Kickstarter is flooded with all sorts of great projects, tons. So the things we found super helpful was networking with other devs, even other people on Kickstarter. You know, you want to view them as potential allies, not enemies, because their audience could be your audience. We did a stream on our last day, and one of our backers gave $500 to another Kickstarter, and we were like, awesome. Thank you, because people who are generous and into Kickstarter anyways want to support multiple projects. They're not like, oh, well, I'm just going to ignore this game that I think is really cool because this one's slightly cooler. No, they're not going to do that. So, cooperate. Getting out in front of an audience at PAX actually helped us immensely. Meeting YouTube streamers and Twitch people, which is kind of like the new media of gaming. Not so much for the app market, but PC, Mac, Linux. Getting out in front of the streamers is huge. And then game press is always just hard to land. It's a lot of those emails, just hoping for a slow news cycle, which this last month was not at all in gaming. It It was a very busy news cycle, so we didn't actually land a Kotaku or a Polygon, but we did get Rock Paper Shotgun, which was pretty good. So it's a lot of marketing work. Like, I'm a game designer, but this entire last month I was 100% marketing guru. Grew our Twitter followers from like 300 to 3,000, so just in just a month. So it's been crazy. Marketing is hugely important.
And I want to say one thing regarding the sort of news cycle idea, or even just the sort of flood problem. We tried a thing, so like I said, we make games really fast. So we tried a thing where for a series of Mondays, we would just take Monday, we make a game, we publish it on Monday, and then just basically kick it out there, not say a word about it. And part of this is because we hadn't actually published anything since Quadrupus in last June. I had gotten sick in the meantime, so we had some stuff to worry about on that front. And we really wanted to just get something out there. So we did this thing, we publish a game every Monday. It takes us about 10 hours from conception to a fully monetized game. And the first one was met with actually a bunch of press, surprisingly, because there's a bunch of the people who are watching us and we haven't said anything for so long. But they grabbed the first game, it was featured around a Google Play in a bunch of different countries and that sort of thing. And then the second one, which of course is 7 days later, ends up doing a little bit worse. And the third one basically did nothing at all, actually, despite the fact that it was one of the better ones we made. And the interesting point here is essentially what happened is we were eating up too much bandwidth, I guess. I mean, people only have enough attention, right? So we weren't giving the cooldown window enough time to actually work. And if you think about that's just our output, but you're talking about, like I said, 97 games popping up in the App Store. So if that's the case, you really have to make a really hard sell, which you guys actually did with the second Kickstarter, right? With the Sprite
Right.
and everything
That's
else.
true. This is actually our second Kickstarter. We failed the first one. We actually pulled the plug after 2 weeks because we got a lot of advice from our game dev buddies who'd done it before, and they were like, "Yeah, man, you're not tracking to make it." So we pulled it and came back with a much stronger project the second time and actually succeeded.
Yeah,
Nice.
and I think that the biggest thing there in the App Store or wherever else is that you are, even though like you are competing just for attention actually against everybody else, and so your thing just, I mean, if you don't have screenshots that are designed for people to actually pay, like that's how people buy games, right? Icons and screenshots, they don't really read the description if it's free especially. So your icon and your screenshots have to be top notch, right? And then the first 10 seconds of gameplay has to be really, really good. Otherwise, people are just going to get kicked out. So if you're loading people up with a huge hand-holdy tutorial and you have some screenshots that just don't really look very good because you didn't really have a buddy who did art and you didn't really care, because you didn't really care about selling stuff, then you need to focus on that particular selling aspect of the game. And I think that's the biggest thing for us, is that we want to focus on that sort of marketability piece. I think you guys experienced that as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. And same thing with the bandwidth. Kickstarter. Every Kickstarter project starts off strong, plateaus, and then ends strong, because in the middle there, there's not so much you can say. There's not so much you can do. Your project just appeared. It's the new hotness, and then towards the end, oh no, they only have 48 hours left. Like, throw your money at it. But in that middle period, it's hard to keep people's attention, especially with new projects coming online and other things like that. But the best thing you can do is cross-promote with other Kickstarters. Keep actually creating content for the game, because Kickstarter, your game's not made yet. So if you can show people who have backed you already cool new stuff that you're already putting in, like we got destructible walls in there, we actually got the UI in, we got a cryo cannon, like a whole new weapon in there throughout the process of the Kickstarter. Like, it helped generate attention, but there's kind of this physics to it where it's gonna, you're gonna spike and then it's gonna plateau and it's gonna spike again. So you gotta plan your marketing efforts around those spikes. Make sure that you have a strong start and you have a strong end. Your Kickstarter page will look nothing like it did when it started by the time that it ends. And if it does, you're doing something wrong. So you constantly want to add new content there. It's just a lot of work, a lot of marketing stuff for people who just want to make games,
Okay, so next question for all of you, and then we'll go to individual questions, and audience can jump in at any time. So when your company began, did it begin with an idea for a specific game, or was it built around the idea of making games in general? Do you think both can work? And why, I guess.
So Graphite Lab is kind of like the St. Louis wing of Black Lantern Studios, which actually started back in 2004 in Springfield, Missouri. And they started the studio just wanting to make games. So they made pitches and had a full-time biz dev guy who kind of helped them get their start in their first 6 months to a year, pitching all sorts of ideas and things like that. And they just want to make games, and that's how they did it. And a lot of days now on Kickstarter, you can see entire companies forming around a single idea. So I think both options are very viable, and you'll see, the Darkest Dungeons guys, for example, come from a bunch of other different studios, and then they come together to make this super mega game that's awesome and go fund it on Kickstarter, and that's how their studio is born. Or like the Shovel Knight guys, right? Yacht Club Games. So they're both definitely viable. It just depends on, with Kickstarter, it's a lot easier if you've got big names from big studios coming together to make something, rather than it being your first outing. I don't recommend trying to use Kickstarter if it is your first game. Because even us, we make games, but we weren't really able to list that many games that we were proud of to that kind of audience. We're proud of everything we do, but like making My Little Pony storybooks is not going to hit the same target audience as the people who are going to give us money on Kickstarter. So even that was difficult for us, being experienced devs, but not being experienced necessarily in the way that people would want to see. So you can do it either way.
I would almost say that you almost need kind of a combination of both those aspects, because if you go into it with a game in mind, you run the danger of only working on that game for the next 2.5 years, and then launching it on the App Store to the sound of crickets. And you don't want that to happen. You also probably don't want your first game to be the game that you spend 2.5 years on. You probably want to have some failures before that. On the other hand, if you start a studio just with the idea of, I just want to make games, that's great, but I recommend you should be the kind of person that has game ideas and likes to fiddle with mechanics and things like that, because the other danger is that you end up running a studio just because you want to be called a game designer and not because you actually enjoy the process of making games. And I've seen that happen a number of times. I recommend making some games and then deciding, yeah, I want to make a studio to do this. And that's kind of where we started. Our history is a little funny because we had some friends that were making games. They were doing this for a company that they worked for, and they made like 3 or 4 different games and not published any of them because the company just wasn't giving them the right tools and the resources they needed. So we kind of said, why don't you guys form your own studio and make games, and we'll help manage and market you. So that's how we started. And then after a while, a lot of them kind of dropped out, and we just sort of took it over because we were really excited about making games. And then some people just were more interested in being called game designers.
Can I piggyback on that real quick?
Yeah.
Just about the whole game design thing, definitely as a game designer for a studio that does a lot of client work, your game design will take the back seat a lot to client requests and publisher branding and all sorts of other things. Maybe they have a user experience expert that directly conflicts with your kind of design philosophy. There's a lot of things that you're going to have to take in stride, and it won't be as pure a design experience as you might want. So the work for hire route is definitely difficult in that sense. If you're a design purist and you just want to make what you want to make, well, sorry, now you got to play as part of a team. So that's just something to keep in mind.
I have a question for you guys. Basically mix client work with your own development efforts. How do you deal with the intellectual property segregation, sharing, cross-pollination aspects? What are your thoughts on that aspect?
It's probably better for you,
So we work on 3 big Hasbro brands right now: My Little Pony, Play-Doh, and Transformers Rescue Bots. All not actually game licenses, they're publishing licenses, so we walk a very fine line with what we're allowed to do with that. So they're more interactive app experiences than games per se, because other people own those licenses, right? But we try to make it as gamey as we can without, we just push the limits. That's what we do, and we get smacked down by brand if they don't like what we did. You don't want you got to be careful. You want to experiment a lot in the design phase and get approval for it. That way you're not getting smacked down when it's right about to go to the store and your budget for actual development's gone, right? So you want to kind of experiment in the design phase and then continue with that, getting approval every step of the way.
My question is more about the intellectual property. Let's say you design this, one of these kind of, you pushed the edge a little bit, made it more gamey.
Oh, sure.
It didn't quite buy off the whole thing, but you got the project done. But some of that gear that came out of it, you kind of said, hey, you know what, let's go make another game.
Oh, yeah.
And take it all the way that you want to do. Do you have concerns about it? Is there a risk of being smacked down or sued?
No, generally, because the contracts that we work out have language in it that will protect us and the frameworks we're developing. So the storybook framework is actually owned by us, not by our publishers or by Hasbro. So you just have to have legal protection in place. And the St. Louis IGDA group does a lot of talks about kind of legal aspects of things. So maybe you want to attend one of those talks to get more of I mean, we actually have lawyers, you know, who are part of the team over at the IGDA who would be happy to answer all of those kind of legal questions. But yeah, basically protect your butt with lawyers, always.
I'd give you even one level further. Yeah. I've seen people in the past, and this is not specific to game design, but they've used clients to help fund some of their work, but not through money, through IP, through intellectual property. So if you have a client that comes to you and says, I want to build this game and I have $100,000. I want you to work on it for a year and it's supposed to do X, Y, and Z. And you look at it and say, well, all right, in order to do this, I'm going to have to make this like whole engine that covers Z, whatever this aspect is that they want in the game. And you could go to that person and say, look, I know that you're paying me to develop this, and I'm going to make this thing, but I can't do it for $100,000. It's going to be like $200,000 because I have to develop this whole component that's going to do just this one thing that you want. And they're like, well, I don't have $200,000. How am I going to do this? Well, one of the things, here's the point of negotiation in the good business. Say, well, why don't you give me the rights to this component that I'm building? I'll let you use it for free. But I'm going to build it. I'll use it for your project. You give me the $100,000. But I want to be able to use this component for any of my own projects or sell it to someone else. And if they don't care, because all that they want is their game or their thing that does X, Y, and Z, great, you both win. And now you have a component, and what you've done is you've effectively bootstrapped some component of your business. So like you said, you have a storybook manager.
Yep.
Some piece of software that you can now reuse for any other client in the world and say, look, we did this, we own the rights to the underlying stuff, and we'll put your face and your brand and your name on top of it. What do you say? Well, there's another $100,000 client.
Yeah, precisely. So the storybook framework is a byproduct of our client work, and when Matt Rathel went out to GDC last March, he's got a page sheet all about the storybook framework, shopping it out to all sorts of people. Hey, we can make interactive storybooks very quickly. I mean, this could be comic books too, just as easily, not just,
licensing that?
Hey, you need a storybook?
There you go, business.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, talk to Matt. Cool. Definitely, we can hook you up with some sparkle. That's what it's called. It's called sparkle. Yeah. So we'll hook you up with some.
Is there an E at the end, or is it just with an L? It just ends in an L.
It's got an E.
Okay. Okay. Very stylistic.
Yeah.
Some Web 2.0 back in the day.
Yeah.
This is what we call networking.
Yeah.
In front of an audience.
Usually networking involves more alcohol.
Cool. Yeah. Okay, let's see. I'm going to talk to Ben. Hi, Ben.
What's up?
Let me make sure that you didn't come. Okay, so your story is probably the most relatable because everyone in the audience wants to make games but has to do it in between their day jobs. Probably everyone. What makes your situation in your company unique is that as an owner of the company, owner of both companies, you have the freedom to make games as your day job, not just like in between your day job. But that said, how do you balance the rampant side and the Happy Badger side?
So what we have done is we try to figure out how much time it would take to do all of our client stuff if we really just cut the fat and just buckle down and do it. Has anybody read 4 Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss? I highly recommend any of you who want to do this method where you're working and making a game, read 4 Hour Workweek because there's a lot of time management stuff in there. So basically we decided if we give ourselves 5 8-hour days to do all of our client projects, it'll take us exactly 40 hours to do all of our client projects. If we give ourselves 3 8-hour days, it'll take exactly 24 hours to do all of our client projects. It doesn't matter how much work we have, it's the time constraint that makes you get it done. If you have less time, you work faster and harder. So the model that we would use is we would do Monday through Wednesday, we get all of our client work done, and then Thursday and Friday we can devote to games or side projects or building engines, whatever we want to do. It's not always games. We like to just experiment, do all kinds of crazy stuff, but we have 2 days dedicated to doing those projects. And that had been working pretty well for us until this summer we got really, really busy. What happened was we had a really slow spring. We put out lots and lots of proposals, some of them lower than they should have been, and then all of a sudden they all signed all at once. So this summer has been really crazy where we've got 8 or 9 projects going on. They all have deadlines right around the same time, and so that 3 days, 2 days thing kind of just fell apart because we're doing too many projects, more than we should have been doing. But we're getting to the point where a lot of those are wrapping up, and we're really excited to go back to our 3 days, 2 days model. Hopefully we'll have a slow winter. Maybe we can even flip that and do 3 days games, 2 days client work.
Sweet.
Yes, I'm actually hoping that we get.
Word.
Maybe
Yeah.
you can economize by
This is
using Sparkle.
just not necessarily about the money financial aspect, but about your time resources as well. How much time in between, like for you, it would be in between both the job that funds it and making games, or just how much time you spend making games every week? Just because I'm curious.
So when we were making client projects, which were kind of games, kind of not, kind of interactive experiences, we kept to a pretty solid 40-hour work week. Sometimes we'd have to crunch just a little bit here and there, but normally we'd keep it very balanced. When we started creating Hive Jump, our passion project, we started putting in a lot of nights and weekends, and it's been like 80-hour weeks for the past 8 months or whatever. So it's been really crazy trying to make that come true. And now that we have fundraising on Kickstarter, we can maybe dial it back a bit, take on less client work, and work on Hive Jump a bit more. So that's hopefully what we're doing. But basically, we had a lot of outside of hours hustle going on for that.
I mean, there are probably between 25 and 28 days usually that I sleep a month. So other than that, yeah, work, things need to get done.
Yeah.
And we tend to, we usually do a pretty strict 40-hour work week, but we just don't mess around when we're working. We get paid exactly, correlated to how much work we do. So it really kind of lights a fire under your butt to get some stuff done. So it's actually harder on longer projects than it is on really short projects because you can't see the end.
Yes.
So that's been the difficult part with this one. The original intention was to make something that took maybe 6 months or so. It's going to be probably a year. And luckily, like I said, passive income, so who really cares at the end of the day? But as long as nothing bad happens. Some stuff. But I think, the truth of the matter is I think one of the best ways to sort of put your face all the way into the grindstone, at least for us, like the idea of jumping all the way in was to make it so that we had to succeed, right? You don't get to set your goal at any bar other than you being alive at the end of the month. So that's what you do, and then you will work appropriately to get to that point via no sleep or via 80-hour weeks or whatever else. And at some point, then hopefully you make enough money that you can, be good again. So we're at the stage where we do like 40-hour work weeks. Sometimes we'll, for fun, make another game on Sunday or something, and like we did yesterday. So
nice.
Yeah, that's 7 hours, pretty good. So yeah, we do between 40 and 60 hours probably.
when I was working on, this is pretty much the average for all my games. They development cycle is anywhere from 6 to 10 months. The last one was 10 months, and I was working my day job, freelance computer animation and that sort of stuff. I worked all day from 9 to typically 4 or 5. Got a little exercise in if I was lucky. I got kids, so it's dinner, get the kids to bed, and then I'd go back to work at about 9:30 every night and work till easily 2:30 in the morning. And that was pretty much all day for virtually 10 months. That's a hard schedule to maintain for very long, but that's what it took.
We stick to a pretty standard 40-hour work week. It's really, for anyone that owns their own business, it's really hard to actually measure because you might be in the office from 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, but then you're doing this kind of stuff at night, or you're working on the weekends for planning an organization. There's all kinds of other hours that you don't even think about, or just the time that you spend in the shower thinking about work. It adds up. But I will say that, one thing that we are pretty adamant about avoiding is the crazy 80-hour work weeks. It's just something that we've decided we don't want to do. And that doesn't mean that we're afraid to work hard. We'd just rather work intelligently with the time we have than go apeshit crazy working crazy hours, because typically not as effective when you've been working an 80-hour work week stint. But that being said, I definitely find myself when I'm working on a project I'm passionate about, I'll definitely put in extra hours because I want to, not because I'm grinding towards some deadline.
Right. All those nights I stayed up, I wasn't cursing myself.
Right.
Oh, I hate this. I was raring to get to it, and I made myself go to bed.
Okay, cool. George, question for you. You worked with a publisher on Dream Revenue. What motivated the choice to work with a publisher, and do you think you'll work with a publisher for your next game?
What motivated my pursuit of a publisher was the delusion, in my case, that they were going to be the golden ticket to absolute breakout success. And what will be the determining factor of whether I work with a publisher again is that didn't happen. Absolutely did not happen. I would say my measure of success with this game, I think my situation is very unique. I was really lucky, as you pointed out, that when I launched my first game, it was when the only Unreal Engine game that had been made was Infinity Blade. Mine was the next. And so because of that alone, it got huge press. And that was my foot in the door. I made contacts at Apple. I made contacts with all the review sites. I've been able to milk that ever since. So fortunately, I've been able to get all my games featured without a publisher. So the publisher didn't bring a whole lot that I thought was real valuable. I was telling you guys on the way here, one of the deals that I made with a publisher is they wanted to cover 5 different languages. My publisher is called Bulky Pix, they're in France. So they wanted English, French, Italian, German, and Spanish.
Great.
E-figs, exactly. So I sent them my 90-some lines of dialogue. I said, here you go. I know you guys are hooked up with a translator. They said, great, this is going to cost about $1,200. We'll take it out of your first payment. What? Now, maybe I got a really cruddy deal. I don't know. But in the end, I thought, I could do this myself. I don't really need a publisher. So I guess it depends entirely on everybody's unique situation. I'm not going to do it again. I don't think I need it.
Well,
Is that for a blunt answer?
Yeah. No, just building off of that. Our first time around on Kickstarter, someone was like, hey, I see you've got a really great project. I got a bunch of marketing contacts. Hire me on to help you guys. And we did. And he basically, all he brought to the table was a big list of press and all sorts of other people that we had to then go through and hit anyways. We kept the list, and we took half of our money back from that guy because he was not good. And but we did use that list of press the next time around. And that's kind of something similar to what Sam said. So, really, you just want to get out there and make contacts yourself. And so what really put us over the top in our Kickstarter campaign this time was making the last-ditch effort to make it to PAX Prime. The Delvers Drop guys, they're actually kind of near Springfield, Missouri. They were nice enough to let us crash their booth and share the cost of that. So for the price of plane tickets and splitting the booth and hotel room and food and stuff, we got out in front of tens of thousands of fans every day, and that was more valuable than any publisher or anything else could have been, was to get that kind of direct contact. And I even went to networking events and got contacts that way. So you gotta not be afraid to market and get out there and network and make the contacts that you're gonna need to succeed. Similar to George, we get a lot of our apps featured as well, and that's because our publishers know people at Apple. So we usually get features when our apps come out.
Can I ask what kind of, like, a difference, did you notice a notable difference in the Kickstarter campaign once you guys got to PAX, and like,
oh, yeah.
whether PAX, and like you said, you, other Matt has attended GDC, like what kind of an impact have conferences and conventions made on your business as far as contacts go?
Huge. So GDC is kind of for our client work all the time. We get out there and pitch to a bunch of people, and just knowing people is fantastic. I mean, there's so much nepotism in the world, and you know, it's all who you know. If there's, you know, the job market is 50% hidden. They try to fill it with people they know first before they ever post an ad for any position anywhere. Same thing with working with publishers and other devs and stuff. Like, they're just not going to know that you exist, and just because your idea is awesome, and it probably is awesome, doesn't mean that they're going to give you the time of day or even know you exist. So you got to get out there and do it. So GDC is great for those kind of professional work for hire contracts, and then PAX was phenomenal for Kickstarter because those are the people that are going to love your game and support it and be your evangelists. Like, people on Kickstarter will go to the far reaches of the internet, to the subreddits, to everything, to go to bat for you and help you out. You still have to do a lot of work. Like, I was doing 24/7 marketing, but you know, they will help you too. So conventions are hugely important. I would encourage everyone to find your way out to whichever one is appropriate for you, right? Whether it be GDC or a PAX or something else. But get out there eventually. Make sure you bring business cards and find some way to swap those cards with other people. My pitch was, and you know, I did this with the Vlambeer guys and other guys that are like our idols, right? Indie devs, they're amazing. And I was like, hey, we're showing at the booth up on the 6th floor. Like, I went to all the booths in the Indie Mega booth, right? They were on the 4th floor, we were up on the 6th. I said, no, I know you probably don't have time to come check out our game, but give me your card and I'll send you a build, which is exactly what we did. So we swapped cards and I sent them builds right, you know, from the airport on the way home from PAX. And a lot of those guys came out in our last hours and said, hey, check these guys out. They're on Kickstarter for the next 4 days. And so our numbers on Kickstarter just skyrocketed from PAX onward. It coincided with that kind of last week push, right? That's natural to any Kickstarter, but I don't think we would have made it without the contacts that we made at PAX. So super important.
And I just want to underscore, so we bought a PR guy for our first release, right? By far the best investment we have ever made, just by far. I got his contact info. We've given him, like, even though we don't use him anymore because we just do it ourselves, we've given him, I think, 6 clients by now. Dude is just a beast. So, and he doesn't do this whole, like, I got a list that you can go through.
Oh, yeah.
You'll just suddenly be all over the place. So, if anybody wants his contact info, I'd be happy to give it to you.
He also gives great hugs.
He does.
He's a giant.
So, Michael, got a question. So what do investors ask for you in return for their investment? You've kind of touched around it, but you haven't gotten to, like, the core of, like, how much
do they want?
Yeah, what are they going to want?
All right, audience question time.
Deflecting.
How many of you have made an investment in the past in some sort of financial instrument? All right. A little bit deeper. Call out some things that you looked at when you made that financial investment.
Statistics.
Interest rates.
You looked at the interest rate, which is how much you're going to get back, right?
Return.
What else did you look at?
Risk, return.
The risk. Are you going to, is it going to go away? Are you going to lose all of your money? Well, okay, that's really all that I needed. Was just those two. So I didn't even have to do any work for this question. But that is what they look for. So when an investor comes in, they're going to look at what is the chance that I'm going to just lose all of my money if I give you this? Because you're going to take their money and you're going to maybe, you know, run your AC like 90% of the time instead of 10. Or buy some extra ramen noodles, or, you know, maybe go out to eat once in a while. Buy that new computer that you really needed for that other intern that doesn't have their own computer, that license to Unity, whatever. So these are all cash flow expenditures. And at the end of it, once that cash is gone, we're going to have a game, right? Well, at least in theory. What if the game isn't done? What if it's like 90% done? Can you release a 90% done game?
Steam Early Access.
Maybe you can. Will that 90% done game make as much money as it should have or make that original investment back? No. There's no way to tell.
Only if it's Daisy.
There is no way to know exactly what's going to happen in the future. So when an investor looks at it, when you're talking with an investor, someone that is considering giving you cash for the potential return of money to them, more money, your interest rate, to them later, they're going to look at what's the likelihood that I'm actually going to get any money back from this person. One of the things that I like to have people do is to think about yourself in the investor shoes and then interview yourself or interview a teammate and pretend to be that. If it's your money, what would be the questions that you would ask? And it's actually pretty simple. But a lot of people don't go through it because, and investors, gosh.
Yeah.
A lot of other people, not me, ever, never me, say that investors are very simple, right? They're looking for very simple things. And these people have other lives. They're not involved with your game. They're not involved with your studio. They're not that involved with you unless it's your rich Uncle Pete, whatever that might be. The point being that you need to break it down. You need to show them why. If it's a special game mechanic, they need to understand not what the game mechanic is, or not even that it's a game mechanic. All that they want to know is that you have a thing that's different than all of the other things, and people care about that enough to give you more money.
Yeah.
You really have to break it down, because when they're there, they are comparing you against buying a second home, or buying a certain stock, or buying something else. That's what you're being compared against. So you have to be ready to give them the numbers and the statistics of that investment in the comparison and language of what that other investment might be.
As a follow-up to that, what if you made something that's more specialized and a smaller demographics? Obviously, it's not like Facebook where you have billions of people, right, kind of thing. But you have a very small demographics. Now, so the funny on that is like, well, I'm not gonna get like 3 million people viewing it every day, right? I may get like 100,000 of that. But not so much a hardcore gamers, but more like a dedicated audience, right? And they actually probably will go with it. Oh, well, okay, say for example, you got actually numbers and say like 10,000 of them that constantly uses it because it's very simple, but it's useful, right? But these are the numbers, and they'll constantly bring that, and it'll slowly grow, but these are dedicated people that will actually go to your platform or your game, whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. But it's not like $1 billion market, but it's still a market, right? So. Yeah.
That's a great question. Let's say that I've come up with a game that is really good at convincing people to play in a certain way, right? All right, but it's very simplistic games and it makes lots of like ringing noises and stuff like that, and it's kind of annoying to play. And my audience is relatively small actually, because I'm regulated. I can only sell it in like to like 20 or 30 states in the United States, and maybe some overseas. And in fact, in most of these places, you're only allowed to even play this game in certain buildings, right? So like,
mine's legal. Just want to let you know.
Right. The point being that if I'm going to make for a smaller audience, someone's going to ask me like, well, that sounds like a terrible position. But like, well, what if people just pour quarters into this machine and they never come out? And be like, whoa, wait a second. You just changed the value proposition, because even though it's a smaller audience, if the people are paying more, or you get a higher return, or the investment overall is less risky, you have to relate both sides. And so they will ask you that. They'll say, what does your game have broad appeal? Candy Crush is a great example of a game that has broad appeal, but not everyone likes it. Not everyone plays it, but many, many people play it. There are other games that are very specific but people are very, very passionate about it and might keep that game for 10, 20 years and continue to play it. Like there are games out there that are like that, and have they monetized those players to the full extent? Who knows? But you have to have the equation that they're going to look at, and that question is after you've got them interested enough in, okay, I think that you can actually pull this whole thing off. Let's talk about how big is your market.
So that follows up the question of how long do I need to trend that? Like you get a baseline, right, obviously, and you get those numbers, but how long does investors see that after like a year? Does, oh, this is good, or do like, well, since you have a smaller market or you're smaller demographics, we need to trend that for like 3 years. So I'll give you a little bit, you know, a third here, or maybe not even all, right? So how, in your experience, do you see investors actually willing to take the step for that growth?
Oh yeah, and the question then becomes, what kind of an investor is it? What are they looking for?
Right.
Do you have someone that is willing to give you money and sit on it for 10 years? That's very possible. If anyone has a retirement account, that's an investment that they're sitting on for many, 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 many years until they retire. Now, if you're talking to someone else that says, well, I really need this money back in like 6 months, that's a different type of investor. So it's really more of a question of finding the right person. By the way, it's extremely difficult to do because there are laws that prevent you from just saying, hey, I'm looking for money for my brand new idea, my new game. And they're there for good reason, but there were in a few years ago, the Jobs Act opened up some of this in certain situations. The thing that it prevents against is from someone going into a retirement home and going up and down the hall and saying, oh, you still have some money in your retirement fund? I have this great investment for your grandkids. You're going to be around for how much long? Okay, yeah, you'll get 100 times return on your money, guaranteed, sure. And just scamming people out of their money. So these laws are there to prevent stuff like that. But you have to be careful with what you say and who you find. Finding the right investor is a question of knowing the right people and asking the right questions. So if you know that you're looking for a risk tolerance and say, I need the money, I need to have this money, I need X amount over 5 years. When you talk to your friends and explain to them why you need that, they then know, oh, well, he's looking for this type of an investor. And then if their rich Uncle George knows something, maybe that's the right connection.
Thank you. Networking.
Networking, yes.
So Costers. I didn't have a name like yours.
Oh, both of you.
Yeah, both of you. You guys are living the indie dream. Have you ever considered any of the funding methods up here that is not your own?
No.
Are you going to consider them?
So the idea is that we don't want to have loans. I don't want to have an investor to deal with because the priorities are different, right? And oftentimes, so this goes back to the question of building a studio versus building a game, I think. And this is something you have to ask yourself, which is that if you're building a game, you do have more of a short-term focus. You play the business side of things a little bit differently than if you're building a studio, right? We talk about Nintendo versus a lot of these sort of one-off games you see on Steam, where you don't know the publisher or you don't know the studio, you'll never know the studio again, that sort of thing. So if you want to build a brand, essentially, and have buying power in the market by building a brand, you do play the game a little bit differently. It's not to say that you can't do that with investors or loans. I mean, it's a good way to do it. We just don't want to do it because at the end of the day, given the fact that the games market is extremely risky, if everything implodes, I'd like to be able to just walk away and get a job rather than have to worry about loan XYZ or any investment sort of stress. So that's our take on it. And the resultant activity of that was just that we had to work X amount longer while saving a ton of money in the background in order to do so and getting rid of all the loans we had. So not a terribly bad thing to do in the first place, by the way.
George actually had a comment earlier that really ties in with it about why are you here? Why are you making games? Do you want to make games or do you want to make a bunch of money? They can coincide, but the core reasoning also goes into why you might want to take financing. If you want to make a bunch of money because you have a game but you want to make it really big, or you want to make a lot of games, then maybe financing is a really good idea. But if you want to live a lifestyle type business, which by the way, if you tell any investor, oh, I love making games, they're gonna be like, well, not this guy because he doesn't want to make money. And all I want as an investor is for this guy to make a bunch of money.
So
if you go in,
this is comical because when we were in Austin for a conference, and some guy, we told him how our business model works. He's like, oh, so you're a lifestyle company. As if doing exactly what you want is something. Like, I'm not aiming to not make a shitload of money. Let's just be clear about this. I just don't need your help to do it, and I don't want it either. Just had to get it off my chest. Freaking guy.
that guy's watching this video.
Good. Anyway, sorry. Continue.
That makes sense.
Going back to financing, you mentioned you raised $850K before. Let's say you'd like to go into a different market. Would you raise money again?
In terms of like, let's say someone buys my company or something and I'm starting from scratch?
No.
Or
Existing company, you want to go to a different market, would you raise outside funding again to go into a different market?
I mean, like
geographic market?
Um,
or any market? I know I asked lots of questions.
Maybe not a complementary market, maybe a completely different one.
It would depend a lot on the situation. So I wouldn't necessarily say that whether the choice to raise money has to do with new product or new development or new market or any of that. It might, but there's a lot of stuff in between.
Sure.
So I would look at why do you need money? If I'm going into a new market and that means that I need to hire 10 new developers to develop this new product and I don't have the money to pay them, then yes, I would look for money. Or I would choose not to go into that market because those are basically your only two options, right? If it's something where I need advertising dollars to go into a new market, maybe. Maybe. It would depend on, can I get that from another partner? Could I get that from some other resource? If I didn't need cash to do it, if I had my product and I just wanted to enter a new marketplace and I thought that I could do it without raising the money, then yeah, of course I would do it without raising money. Because keep in mind, money is expensive, which is the funniest thing that but it is, right? If you get money from someone else, having that cash, you're paying for it. You're paying interest, or you're giving up part of your company, which is your future proceeds. That's what is not wanted, right? Yeah. You don't want to have to be tied to that because you have to give that later. And if you grow really big, remember that you give away percentages. And that's why investors like this, in terms of equity investing at least. If you give up 15% of your company, all future value that you create as a company, you would give up that 15% for however much now, $100,000 now. Well, if you're worth $1 billion later,
best investment ever.
Right, that investor's gonna be like, awesome, let's do this again. I'll even give you the same amount for less percentage. Be like, a lot less percentage. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, Matt. Have you guys ever had the opportunity to work with a partner that you didn't take because it was unfair, or you relinquished too much creative control?
Sure, all the time. We do a lot of that design work up front, right? And when it comes time to contract negotiation, sometimes we get really burned because they just, we get pretty good at estimating how long it's going to take us to do something because we're a core team. We work together with each other full time, right? We're all full-time game devs. Thanks to the contract work, we don't have to work other jobs. So sometimes when it gets to the point of contract negotiation, they just don't want to pay what we're worth. And you have to have the integrity to know what you're worth and to not really get burned on it. So yeah, we've had to turn down things plenty of times.
What about for creative?
Oh, on creative? Well, creative sacrifices. I don't know. I think as a game designer doing what I do now, sure there's a lot of ideas that we'd like to do that sometimes we have to sacrifice. Like, for instance, we work with an educational specialist first, then with our clients, and then with Hasbro brand. Every time we go through a storybook, it's always these hoops to jump through, and we lose things along the way that we'd like to try to do, or they like to try to scope creep and add things on. Well, can't we just get this little mini game inside the game? And it's like, well, now you're asking us to make 2 games. Pay us more. No, too bad. You can't have it then. We'll do something else. But it's very collaborative, and I always try, as a designer, I try to work around those kind of impediments and try to find a good compromise.
Cool. All right. Anyone?
If you were better capitalized for any of the panelists, how would you run your game development differently?
I'd add more people. I think we can fit maybe another 4 people in our current office space, and we could definitely utilize them with the amount of contracts we have going on and with Hive Jump now kicking off. So I would just add more people with more money.
I would say that probably 80% of the money that we raise goes directly to people, so more people.
Yeah.
I would offload some of the non-game related stuff. So PR, I mentioned. It'd be cool if I didn't have to do that, and if that was someone else's issue to handle.
Have the AC on more.
Yeah, maybe have the AC.
Whoa, not that much capital.
we did just add our other brother.
Yeah.
We are 3 brothers, so makes working easier in that regard. But he's a PhD.
Ooh.
So if we had more capital, PhD and we do like you'll see if we do like doing research and development. So that's actually what he's primarily doing. He does image analysis and some other fun stuff. So that's the sort of we now have an R&D wing because we have a guy for that. So it would be cool to have other people on board. But I think primarily, probably less as far as here team growth goes, and more figuring out where we need to allocate those resources appropriately to take some of the tasks off of us. Because each of us wears like 12 hats. That's a lot of hats.
So I'm going to answer the question as myself, not necessarily representative of Happy Badgers, because it's not a thing that we've really discussed. Like, what would we do if we had, $500,000 to just make games with? But myself, like, my dream, if I had just flow of cash coming in to do whatever I wanted with, is I would work with a small team. I'm like a ideas person, so I just constantly like have stuff swimming in my head. So I'd work with a small team and prototype ideas on a small scale, and then push those out to slightly larger teams to build out, and just kind of see which ones float, which ones sink, which would probably mean more people. So people's your most expensive thing. If you think about your costs, you got rent, your air conditioning, food, and then people was like up here. So that's always expensive, but I would use the people for the purposes of just testing out as many of my ideas as I possibly could.
I'd want one of those office cats, those really big cats. Jungle cats. That's what I want.
Just ride it to work.
Yes.
I can get on board with that. Not so much the idea.
One of the things about capital, so for small teams, a lot of us, and probably the way that all of us started, you have to do everything. So when you have capital, you can pay people to do the things that you're not great at. Because really, if you think about it, you should only be doing the things that you are really, really good at in terms of the marketplace. Because why would you pay anyone else to do them if you're the expert? So offload your other tasks that you're not good at, or don't like doing, or don't appreciate doing, whatever it is. Do the things that you're awesome at.
I'm not sure if this will be addressed later, but concerning paying people, based on your guys' success or failures or whatever, the outcome of your games, do you reward your team within the same ratio of that, or how does that work in terms of like management of your employees?
So our team owns the company. So we split it. We split literally everything, and nobody else gets anything. That's how we do it.
So the first game that Happy Badgers ever made was made with a team of like 7 or 8 people. I think not even including like 3 of us. Game made about $12 total, so everyone got split like $1.12 or something like that.
That's
I can talk pretty extensively to that issue. So when we first started our company, we attempted to do this system where, based on each different project, and some of these projects were games and some were completely engineering tasks or tools or physical products. It was all kinds of different stuff. And we attempted to make a system where each team that contributed value to those projects got some kind of incentive if that project did really well. So the idea being that if one was a takeaway hit, that team would get a portion of the profits from that. The system was like, in concept, it was great, right? Because everyone gets awarded appropriately and all that. In reality, it became a huge burden on the team, and there were questions, and there were vague points that weren't clear of exactly what counted for what things, and it became a problem. So when you're a small team, being able to just say, we're all in it, we all split it, is very easy. When you grow, if you're a larger company, you can't do that as much, because the employees that you hire will care more about the security of the job and less about sharing in the upside. Because those are your two trade-offs, right? If you say, look, I'm going to give you a salary of X per year, and you get X per year. And if our game makes billions of dollars, you still make X. But if the game doesn't make any money at all, you still make X. If that person has obligations that they have to pay for, and they know that that's what they're living inside of, that may be perfectly fine. If you're an owner, or if you're very early on as part of a team and you want to share in the upside and you're willing to not get paid for a few months, then you might be able to share in the upside. Anything that's a blended model gets really tricky really fast. So beware of that it's hard to manage.
So we do have the easy advantage for us. Like, we've known each other for 24 years. So there's a level of expertise there and a simple punching mechanism for solving things usually work out okay. But I do honestly think having a partner, an actual partner, is one of the best things you can do as far as really taking stuff up a notch. Seth was making games for a while in law school by himself, and then I came on board, which just the amount of extra stuff you can get done and the soundboarding you do with another person is fantastic. And then with this other brother, it's the same sort of exponential jump as far as the quality goes. So I would highly recommend at least one other partner besides yourself, if I had a thought for you.
If I can actually add to the question, I know I'm not on the panel, but this is, I read it and recently, is that actually bonusing employees based on reviews and based on sales of the game is a controversial point in the game industry right now, and actually tends to lead to higher employee stress rates, like Michael was saying. It is commonly done, but it makes the employees become much less focused on the game itself and much more focused on trying to figure out how to make reviewers like it more, as opposed to how to make it the best possible game, which there is some overlap there, but I think it's best to actually go more with the salaried option. If you're going to have salaried employees, don't promise bonuses based on reviews so much as other things, just based on the reports that I've been reading, basically.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a game designer, you should recognize that if you're designing a system to dispense money for other game designers, then they're gonna min-max the system as quickly as possible. It's what you do, right? But you design games, and the monetization, salary, and compensation is a game, right? That is what it is. So if you have a bonus, if you have all these layers of stuff going on, it's going to get real complicated, and things are not going to be where they need to be focus-wise.
So I can't really speak for our employee Joey because he's not here, but I would feel like knowing Joey loves his job. I mean, he said that today. He's like, I freaking love working here. He said that. Quote. And when we sign a project, or when we have a mild success with the game, he's excited not because it means a bonus for him or anything like that. He's excited because it means he can continue doing this job that he loves. Again, like he can keep doing it without having to worry about we're going to go out of business or we have to cut his hours or something like that. So it's, yeah, the reward is that he gets to continue doing the thing that he loves.
So to add on to that, so you said salaries are basically the normal way that you pay your people, does that apply to the art team as well? Say you have like this guy from Bungie, he's like, oh, I'm gonna help this indie group, and then you have your other artists. Would you just say all artists are paid this rate per hour, or how does that work? 'Cause I'm more on the art side, so.
So if you want to do like commission work for art.
Oh no, I'm talking about like if you hire on artists or.
Yeah, so I mean everybody. I think you could probably speak more to.
Yeah,
salary
so
negotiation.
for us, we do salaries. We do it on an individual basis. It's based on your expertise, experience, what we can handle in the marketplace, and the geographic, what you can get elsewhere in St. Louis. It's pretty standard to most companies how that works, and it doesn't really matter if you're a programmer or an artist or something else.
So taken from your expertise in your field.
Yeah, and there are many common ways to do that. It also saves you from some legal troubles too, because if you go down a path of, there are certain biases that you can show, and that if you don't have a system in place on how you evaluate, or if you're using a system that is not legal to use, you can get in trouble. And the trouble comes in a lawsuit. Yeah, it costs money. just
So
money.
clear.
So if you are already cash strapped, don't do that.
Yeah.
Okay. How late can we go here? Okay. How late do you guys have to be somewhere?
I'm good.
Are there any other questions?
All right, cool. Bring them on.
How complete do your games need to be before you go to Kickstarter?
Oh boy.
All right, so the first time we tried, we were concepting the game in November, spent December and January making a prototype. It was more like 8-bit art style, and we had a decent. No, we had a terrible demo loop, and it was all rubber bands and toothpicks and whatnot. And we tried and we failed. So definitely not just 2 months in. There are people who go to Kickstarter, 90% of the way there, and they just want the Kickstarter money for marketing and things like that. That's not what we did. We used Kickstarter as it was intended to raise funds for the actual development of the game, but we put 8 months into it. So after the initial 2 months, we spent another 5 months, I'd say, on the technical basis. Okay, so that's the animation, the movement, the art. It all got up-res to 16-bit. We added dynamic per pixel lighting. We did a bunch of stuff. Rewrote all the game code using state machines and all sorts of other stuff. So spent another 5 months of just hugely intensive work on the idea. And it's an idea that's so large that it is not able to be rapidly developed. Like, for instance, the Butterscotch guys, they're able to knock these things out. But this idea is so large and requires a lot to it. Anyway, so we spent those 5 months, and then another 2 months prepping the Kickstarter page. And even that was almost not enough because we didn't have those contacts, right? So we had to do that during the campaign, which was incredibly stressful. That being said, if you think you want to do Kickstarter, we're going to be doing a post-mortem on what we went through the first time, the second time. We'll be posting that soon to graphitelab.com. We got a blog there. So definitely keep a look for that, but you got to put a lot of work into it. A lot of work. And the best thing you can have on your side, other than everything that's the bare minimum, the Kickstarter page, the marketing art, things like that, other than the bare minimum, you got to have a really solid demo. And luckily we were able to throw together 2 really fun demo experiences, a 2-minute ambush loop where you're just fighting bugs for 2 minutes and then you escape out the door. And then also kind of a speedrun challenge build, which was really fun for the Twitch guys once we got them on board. We actually had Man vs. Game play that the last day of our campaign, and he's huge, and that was awesome. So a demo is really, really important.
I think you have to show that you're really invested in your idea. We did a Kickstarter for a game that we concepted at Game Jam, and really all we had was an idea. It wasn't really a fleshed out game. The idea was we have a beautiful art style, and we want this game to make people experience empathy. That was the idea, and it was a beautiful idea, and people really clinged to the idea. But in the Kickstarter, we hadn't gotten past the idea phase. We didn't really know what the game was, and I think people could tell that we hadn't yet invested ourselves into it. And it's hard to ask people to invest their money into something if you haven't fully invested into it?
Yeah. They got to be able to play enough of the game that they can see where it's going with the rest of your development time.
You can't just say, you can't just, say, I have an idea, and if I make enough money from you guys, I'll go ahead and continue this idea. You gotta be able to fully back the idea.
Yeah, so like our game involves a bunch of jumping, jetpacking around, and shooting aliens, and the aliens are vicious, and they come up and they tear your face off. That's basically the game, right? So, I mean, there's a lot more to it in the full version, but we had to show at least really solid running, jumping, shooting mechanics, the lighting system we were going to use, show off the art. We needed to show enough that people could see where it was going to go from there and get excited about it. So even these streamers, they could say, oh, hey, this is going to be really cool when it's done. Go help them, make it happen. So you got to have enough to show the fundamentals.
So, regarding the Twitch streamers and the YouTubers and the content creators, with indie development jumping up really recently, and then just in general that what's it called, Gen Z generation, people who are making these videos and unboxing views and stuff like that. There's been criticism of people actually paying for their services. What's your guys' opinion on that?
We've never paid for anything like that, and I don't think you need to. Every streamer I met was a really earnest and awesome person, and I can't imagine running into the people that do actually do that, although I suppose it's a thing, right? Yeah. But I don't think it's as prevalent as you might be led to believe. A lot of these guys are just super awesome, or ladies. They're all just super awesome people. They want to just play games and enjoy them and share them with an audience, and they're entertainers, first and foremost. I think the people that do it for money like that are kind of, I would assume the rest of the Twitch streamers are really upset with them as well, because it's about entertainment and putting on a good show. And it's supposed to be
symbiotic. I mean, you're providing them content, they're providing you exposure.
Right.
They're making money off of your content, ideally. If they have a following, they're making money off your content.
Yeah, so I wouldn't recommend that as an avenue, just for the precedent that it sets. Don't play their game if that's what they're going to do, because there's so many great streamers out there who don't do that, and you can get plenty of exposure other places. Don't play their game. Don't make it a thing in the industry. Our actions are all very important, so make the good choice.
The app reviews as well do this. So some of the sites that covered us a year ago sent us a note last week, and apparently they started doing this now, where they're like, well, they try to pitch you paying them to, but we're like, you already covered this twice a year ago on launch day for free, so we're good. But the other point is, again, a lot of it in our case it just talks about being lead. Don't pay for things that you don't need to be paying for. And if it's supposed to be, if it is a symbiotic relationship where you can make the argument, you're pitching to them, my content will get you views, which gets you click through on whatever else. And that is what the pitch is. So it's kind of a silly thing to pay for.
Yeah. And I need to speak more on not so much the darker side, but there's actually websites that say we'll connect you with these YouTubers and your mutual benefit. They'll be the transportation to actually get in talks with these people, because some people have 70 million followers or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's hard to break through that. So what your opinion on that? Not so much, oh hey, I know this guy.
So paying for connections.
Don't go through a middleman.
Be very wary of that.
Don't do it. A lot of these streamers, all the great ones, they'll have their business email on on their Twitter page maybe, or on their Twitch page through a link. It's out there for a one-to-one connection. You just need to have something that's good enough to draw their eye. So that's what you should focus on. You shouldn't pay someone else for the hope. Or if you want to spend money on it, go fly out to a convention, go meet them. Show them your stuff there if you really need to get it in front of them. Kind of what we did, but they came to us, luckily. they made the rounds, which was cool. So
I want to reiterate something that's kind of been a recurring theme. I'm going to interject here. The recurring theme has been you need a good game first. So if you try to sneak your way into a top 10 list, or try to get users, none of that's going to matter if you don't have a way if you're not, if those users don't care, like, then it isn't going to matter. And the only way to make them care is having something worth caring about.
And those people are the people who want to sell you on their list or their connections or whatever, are going to tell you your game's great. Like, stick to other game developers for honest feedback. Like, we'll tell you if your game's not there yet or not fun. Like, we have a great game dev community here in St. Louis. You know, don't get sold on someone else just because they like your game and you're super invested in it. You know, you're super invested in your own idea and the time you put into it. But yeah, don't let them sell you on stuff like that.
And there are some ways to do really smart, quick marketing stuff using Scrubber and a couple of other things for Google Chrome. So, like I said, move as quickly as possible and be lean about stuff. And the reality is that a lot of these sites like that make money off of the fact that it's kind of scary for you to do something where you don't actually know how in the hell this works, you don't know anybody, and they're actually just making money off of that fact.
Yes.
So oftentimes if you just spend maybe a couple hours in an evening reading up on ways to essentially generate your own list of these possible people and a bunch of other things, there's plenty of avenues you can go down where within a couple hours you can essentially see the amount of work that they're theoretically doing for you, and it probably actually won't be as much as they're trying to charge you for.
Yeah.
It's not exactly a question about funding, but right now, obviously, the big continued focus is on mobile gaming and continues to expand. Do you guys see that as kind of continue to be the trend for the next couple of years? Are you guys seeing that kind of play out in other categories? Are gonna some shifts are gonna happen? Just what do you guys think in terms of trends?
Yeah, so I think App Annie released their App Annie is a big analytics platform for the mobile market, and they released their quarterly report. I think last week, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, was a 23% increased revenue in the mobile market, especially in the game sphere. Takes up most of that actually. So yeah, mobile market is huge. Android is already enormous. The people, for some reason, act like it's not. That is where we make almost all of our money. And it's easier to get into, and they have better discoverability. So Android is doing better and is actually catching up, even though iOS still, believe, pays on average like 23% more or something like that. You can look up, just definitely look up the App Annie index, and they'll show you all that stuff. As far as revenue for handheld devices, like Game Boys, that are actually just built for gaming, it's actually down. And there's a couple other interesting trends there, but for the most part, the mobile market is not going away by any stretch whatsoever. So
one of the main things that you actually see now are younger people are getting phones or tablets and not a computer. So you jump it and don't even have the desktop, and your only gaming device then becomes your phone.
I think mobile is definitely not going away anytime soon, but the thing to keep in mind is that while it's growing, so is the competition. And we've seen it, like in the past 12 months-ish, we've released like 3-ish games, and with each one have seen the amount of day one downloads has decreased, and the amount of residual downloads after that has decreased, one after another. So it's only getting more and more congested.
So saturation.
Yes. And the other thing there's some cementation for the people at the top. If you look at the charts for like top 10 games for the past like 3 years, a lot of them are the same. Actually, there's very little movement because essentially once you get up there high enough, you just pay for users.
Yeah, so
it keeps you up at the top. So there's a lot of, even though the actual revenue is going up, the split is really interesting because Candy Crush made 4 of the 21 billion? 2 out of $12 billion. The mobile market made $12 billion, and Candy Crush made 2 of the games market of that, so they made 1/6 of it. That's one company, right? So the mobile market is extremely top heavy, like extremely. I mean, by making essentially like the average, if you're making like maybe $50,000 a year out of your apps on the App Store, you're actually above the top 10% of developers. Wow. Most apps do not make money. Most of them do not.
So here's an important thing I think we need to bring up, because a lot of people aren't aware, is that the app stores as they exist today are largely just a broken system. What you do is you create a decent enough game. Candy Crush is not a bad game. It's addictive, right? But then what you do is you pump hundreds of thousands of dollars into user acquisition. And the way the stores are set up right now is your ranking is based on how many downloads you get. So if you pump $100,000 in and acquire a bunch of users, guess what? Your rank shoots up. Once your rank shoots up, what's the most organic way people find you? The top 10, top 50. Once you're up there, you continue to get downloads. And as long as you have a decent enough game, you're going to continue to get those downloads. So it is a very broken system right now. I've heard that there's changes coming to iOS 8 to help discoverability. I don't think it's going to fix it. I think we're a long way off from fixing it because Apple benefits, Android benefits from, or Google benefits from these whales at the top raking in billions of dollars.
So one interesting note there is we're featured on iTunes and on Google Play for Quadrupus, and on iTunes in the what's not in the big banner. If you get one of those big banners, you're doing great. But at least maybe we thought we were going to be doing great if we were in the other pieces too. It didn't turn out to be the case. So if you're essentially the way it works is that most of your users actually come, like the people who download the game come at it through their phone. And so the first 3 games on that list, like new and noteworthy, what's hot, those are the games that get downloaded. Everybody else does not. We are number 7 on that list, I think. First with Tau Fight, number 10. With Quadrupus, number 7. Didn't do a thing to our numbers. On Google Play, because of the way that they curate their system, because of the way it displays the apps, there's just a lot more bleed through. So we actually get downloads whenever we're in one of those lists, and we were getting 25,000 downloads a day at the start when we were featured along with like 3 other games on that first sort of splash screen there. So even if you get featured in that sort of top 10 spot, doesn't mean if anybody has to scroll, if there's any physical movement necessary, it's not happening. You got to be in the first 3. So
one more thing to keep in mind: remember that Google and Apple own a large portion of the mobile ads that you see, so they have very little interest in making user acquisition less effective.
I was just going to jump in and say another thing. Since you probably don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to pump into user acquisition, something you can do is network and try to get a contact at Apple or Google Play or something like that. So a lot of our pony books, they get featured when they come out, largely because we keep going through this Apple review process every time, and it's not a guarantee that they're going to get featured, but we have done consistently good work, and so we get featured pretty much every time. And if you really want to go in, what we did most recently was they were putting together a promotion for International Friendship Day, and hey, it's like My Little Pony, friendship is magic, right? Friendship Day. So we pitched this big thing where they'd feature all the storybooks we put out so far, and it actually did end up going through, which was huge. And we made one of them free, and kept the other one, and actually put all the other ones on sale for 99 cents. They're usually $1.99. So the one that was free, during that feature, got over 1 million users, and that was huge. And then, of course, in the free app, you put your little store portal in the corner that's like, hey mom, hey dad, look at all these other storybooks that are also there. So that was pretty helpful. So definitely having free apps is a great way to acquire users. And then you can either go the route of monetizing, right, which I think is the wiser of the 2 options, and or hope that some of that bleeds over to your other apps, which are pay-for apps, but I don't think that's actually as effective as just doing some smart monetizing. So. Okay,
so we're getting really close to 9. I don't want to keep people more than 2 hours, unless there's like an overwhelming, like.
We could always do a stay after if you want.
But I do kind of want to do something high energy for the end, so I'm just going to ask like a real quick question to each panelist. You have 1 minute to answer it. You don't have to take the whole minute.
We get extra points. We answer in 10 seconds.
You get extra points. You answer in 10 seconds.
Question jam.
Okay.
Okay. So George, you've published several games, and you also write the very popular Harry Potter fanfiction series of James Potter books. Which one's more successful from a personal and financial perspective?
Well, the James Potter stories don't make any money at all, so the obvious answer is the game is in terms of finances. But I gotta think the books actually are more creatively rewarding, because I've got millions of readers through those, even though nobody wants to admit they write Harry Potter fanfiction. Yeah, I mean, it's a close tie, but the bottom line is, as an artist, what you want, I don't know, I mean, maybe I'm alone here, but what I want, even slightly more than money, is people do enjoy my stuff. So I've gotten a lot more response from my books in that sense. If I could monetize those, it'd be a different place. Open for suggestions.
Okay. He did that. I read about that. Okay, Matt?
Yes.
I've got a question. So Graphite works with some of the biggest brands in the world. Do you choose those brands based on what you think is cool or what you think will make the most money?
That's more of a question for our actual publishers who have bought the licenses, right? Because we don't buy the licenses. But yeah, I mean, I've learned to appreciate all the brands we work with: My Little Pony, Play-Doh, Transformers Rescue Bots. I think that's definitely the weakest of the three. But no, I mean, I've learned to appreciate them all, and we do right by the brands in each instance, and that's all we can do as kind of contractors. So that's why we're really excited to be creating our own original property with HiveJump. So that's how I'll have to answer it.
I would like you to know I have 65 Optimus Prime toys. So, just throwing that out there.
If you will.
So.
Thank you.
That's
good.
All right. So, Michael, how much business education do you need to fund your work this way? And do you need a business guy?
You surprisingly don't need a lot of formal business education, formal being the key word. And I personally have 3 engineering degrees, so I was not in the business side of it all, and I just learned little by little. Wikipedia, Google, you can do amazing things with the internet.
Cool. All right, and Ben, how did working with an outside brand and making Strange Donuts versus the World affect your development?
Working with Strange Donuts was awesome because they're not a big brand like Hasbro or something like that. So the restrictions or the suggestions rather they gave was make it 16-bit, inspired from Simpsons, and have 4 donuts in it, and everything else was just whatever we wanted to do. So we just made a game that we wanted to make, that we wanted to play. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right, and Costers. you can go. Your model has the highest level of creative freedom, but also has the most risk. Do you agree with this statement? And what makes the risk worth it?
I think it depends on what you define as risk. I'm passively making money, and it doesn't cost me anything. And so, given that I've basically the way that we've managed to set up the company and also our lives around the company is such that failure is not that big of a deal. We did that on purpose because we don't have any business education. So, well, Seth kind of does. So we had to fail in order to get it. We did not have any games education. I did not know how to make art when we decided that we were going to make money off of games somehow. Seth had been programming for a year, so we had to make a model that allowed us to fail repeatedly. So I think, that being said, I don't think the model actually is particularly risky, and especially given the speed that we've been able to do it. So that's the way we've managed to carve out a niche for ourselves in that sort of business sphere.
Oh, sweet. All right, 57 seconds. Okay, cool. So,
windy.
So cool. Yeah, thank you guys very much.